everybody. Sharon, do you want to go ahead and welcome folks?
Hi, everybody. Welcome to our session today, Calm and Connected, Navigating the Wellness Using the Polyvagal Ladder. This is part of our Transforming Schools Trauma Engaged Practices series. And I'm glad you are all here. And I'm going to turn it over to our presenters.
Thanks, Sharon. Hi, everybody. My name is Christina Borbet. I'm really excited to be here with you today. I'm joined by my colleague, Carolyn Spezza, and we are bringing this information to you in the context of trauma-engaged schools with a lens and a focus on building our own wellness, our own capacity to address chronic and crisis levels of stress. And we'll talk about why that's important in just a moment. But I wanted to introduce myself. I've been working in collaboration with Sharon and her team at DEED since 2014. I am passionate about school mental health and student wellness. And in the last, I guess, year and a half, have really started focusing on bringing wellness to the entire campus community. And so I'm really excited to be part of this series. And Carolyn and I are also working on the wellness series track. And so if you haven't attended one of those sessions, please consider it. But today we're going to bring wellness through polyvagal ladder climbing right here to you. Again, this is a topic that I am learning as much as I am disseminating information about. And so it's been a really powerful process for me personally to understand how some of the science works behind the experiences that we're having as adults who are champions and allies of young people in schools. And part of that inspiration has come from my partnership with Carolyn. And so Carolyn, I'm going to hand it over to you to introduce yourself.
Sure. My name's Carolyn, and I've been working as a research assistant first for Christina on and off for about 15 years. And I do speak with a stutter, so I don't want to catch you off guard as I begin to stutter. And something about myself is one of the things that makes my heart get excited and skip a beat in a good way is when I get to learn about this intersection between when scientists in human physiology work with mental health practitioners to come up with ways to help us to understand how stress can map onto the body, and then also to come up with tools to help us to reduce the impact of stress on the body based on physiology. And so I'm really grateful to get to be here today. And I love how this training gets to be presented in the lens of staff wellness for the hardship that you're facing as in the schools, and with the hope that maybe down the line, this model can help you to communicate with colleagues on how we can use this model to better support the students and the families we work with. Thanks, Christina.
Thank you, Carolyn. And I want to say yes to staff wellness, and also learning about the polyvagal ladder and these strategies that we're going to talk about today together in terms of how to navigate our own stress response, apply outside of our professional spaces as well, which I can talk about later if we're sharing personal examples. But let's go ahead and jump in. I want to just note that we're going to assume here, we're going to take a leap of faith and assume that you already know that serving youth in school and in community-based settings can be stressful, even under the best of circumstances. Working with youth some days can feel like we're successful, we're on top of the world, we're just floating along. And then other days we feel completely wiped out, knocked down. It's like we've been run over by a bus full of kids, full of bureaucracy, just full of too much to do. So, you know, we have the highs, we have the lows. And a lot of times when we look at what are the exacerbators or magnifiers of stress, we know it comes most often when there's a mismatch, when there's incongruency between the needs of the young people that we're serving, especially when they're vulnerable youth, and then the resources that we have to support them. So having that mismatch can just exacerbate our feelings of stress and anxiety. And we want to be particularly mindful of how that can affect us when that's a prolonged situation. But before we get to that part, let's talk about why we keep coming back, right? Most of us experience fatigue, experience compassion fatigue, and yet we still show up. And part of why we're doing this series is to give you some tools and resources to restore, to replenish, and to nurture yourself, so that keeps being the case, that you keep coming back. We know a big compelling motivator for that is all the kids that we want to be there for, right? So that's why I do the work. I want to show up for young people. We want to be there for the moments that they're feeling successful, and we want to be there for the moments that they're feeling discouraged. And this is my most kind of like, why does Christina get up in the morning situation? It's just this idea that maybe our hearts can somehow help their hearts grow stronger. And I just love this illustration as a demonstration of that. You know, that really when we think about what is our why, even on the hardest days, even after days and days and days of the hardest day, it's this idea that, you know, we can help these young people, we can nurture them in their own resilience. But we also want to think about how we nurture our resilience. So one of the considerations we'll be talking about today is the impact of workplace stress. And we know that schools are a particularly stressful work environment under good circumstances, and we have been in really chronic stressful circumstances with this pandemic for quite some time now. And so we want to just briefly touch on some of the really high level issues that we face when we look at the impacts of workplace stress. So we have scientific evidence as well as just our common sense to tell us that this exposure to prolonged stress can impact our health in the long term and the short term. We know that it impacts the finances of our schools and agencies. And then we also know that it's impacting the hearts and minds of the children who are developing in these contexts of schools. And so that's what brought us here today. That's our why for why this session. And let's talk about what we're going to cover today. So our learning objectives, what we're hoping to get out of the time together today, are to use a trauma-informed framework. So this links right into a lot of the trauma-engaged school information that you've been practicing and learning through this series. So we're going to use the trauma-informed framework to notice and respond to how we react to stress. We being all of us here and all of the rest of the colleagues that you work with. We're going to gain strategies to support capacity for maintaining a sense of safety and connection. So again, when we need it most, when we need our resilience most, what are the concrete strategies that we can engage to help us navigate? And then we're going to share a tool at the end of today's session to help you develop your own awareness and skills, to promote your ability to stay balanced, to stay connected, to stay compassionate, including when you're feeling overwhelmed or at risk of burnout. And so that'll be a tool that you can take with you, and it's almost like an implementation plan. You know, so once you complete it, it's something that you can keep handy. It's the tool that I use regularly to help maintain my own emotional regulation. And so we'll have that to share as well. But again, these tools are all designed for you all and for your colleagues. And so why don't we go ahead and get started? What is it exactly that we're talking about when we say polyvagal ladder? It sounds very sophisticated. I want you to think back, way back when, get in a time machine and go to your high school biology class. There's probably a lesson that you may recall about these two interconnected systems of the body, right? So we learned in high school about this concept of a system that mobilizes us to respond to a threat, and then another system that helps to bring us back, right? Bring us back to a state of calm and serenity once the threat is no longer present. So that was our basic overview in high school biology. The first system kicks in if we are being chased by a lion or something scary and we need a ton of energy to survive. So the system mobilizes our inner resources, right? So physiologically, our body responds by flooding us with adrenaline and oxygen so that we can fight or flee whatever the threat is. With a lion, I don't know, take your pick, fight or flight, fight or flee. Neither one of them feel like a good choice, but our body doesn't leave it to our mind. It just kicks into gear so that we have the resources we know we need to mobilize. But once that risk is over, right? Once the lion no longer feels like a threat, we have a second system to help us de-escalate. It helps us turn off that stress response system. It helps us peacefully relax, enjoy our favorite people in our lives. And it's when we're in that mode that we really get to rest, that we get to restore, that we get to digest. And the other thing that happens during this mode is that we get to notice the people in our lives. So in this case, we've escaped the lion and now we're in front of our cozy fire pit, looking across the fire peacefully at someone else that we care about. And just having that experience of connection to another human smiling at us sends a cascade of signals, again, physiological response, a cascade of signals that helps us feel even safer and more connected. And then there's a reciprocity effect where our response to that, our smiling, our gazing back calmly, helps regulate the other person, help them feel safe and connected too, right? So that's the basics, right? We have one system in our stress response system, we have one aspect that helps our body respond to the perception of threat by flooding with resources, elevating us, and then the second part, calming us back down and putting us back into a state of calm and connectedness. And that's kind of the core lessons that we learned for quite some time. And maybe if you didn't move on past high school biology, that's kind of where you landed on the automatic nervous system, which is a fancy term that we learned to talk about our stress response system. But Carolyn, I know based on what you've taught me that things are changing. So I'm going to turn it over to you to let us know what's happened since high school biology.
Let me unmute myself here. So far, my slides are not advancing. Just a moment. Here we go. So as opposed to, so the body is of course very complicated. So whenever we try to use metaphors, it's they are just metaphors, but it may be more useful now. Instead of thinking about the autonomic nervous system has two systems, one to bring us up, the other one to bring us down, as three ladders. The first ladder is simply a new representation of the yellow circle, the things that can help the body's response, perceptions of threat, and to mobilize us. I'm sorry, my slides are not the way I expected. And then the second one is, I'm sorry, I'm off guard because I think we have two different slideshows. I don't know if I got the wrong one. Okay, so I'll keep going though. The second.
Do you want to take a pause, Carolyn, and I can
just a moment? I apologize.
No worries. So maybe while Carolyn is setting that up, I noticed that some folks were talking about some of the things that help them feel better when they are feeling like that lion is the threat. And so, I wanted to just identify that there are a variety of things that can engage our automatic nervous system. And and thinking about kind of what those things are is going to be how we connect our physiology to the practices that we engage in to change how our body's responding to our environment. Carolyn, do you feel like you want to pick up now?
I think so. Thank you for giving me a couple moments. See if this works now. So again, the yellow ladder is going to be, we can use the visual of when we perceive that there's danger. So we need to mobilize the body's responses to survive. So we're going to label this yellow ladder mobilized. So the green ladder is also just a new way to represent the system for when we perceive that the threat's gone, so we can just rest. The problem is my internet's slow, so my slides are kind of jumping around. I apologize. So this is the visual of the little person that's sitting across from somebody else at the fire pit. So we're going to label this connected and safe. And the reason is because, as Christina talked about, when our body feels like we're safe, a whole host of cascade things that happen that make us so we're more able to connect with others, which makes us feel safer. And there doesn't necessarily need to be somebody at the fire pit or in the room with us, because when we feel like we're safe, we can, like in our minds, we can even conjure up this sense that we're connected. So for the third ladder, so where does that come in? So for this ladder, we can think about what happens if there's not just one lion that's stalking us, but there's two. And so we suddenly may perceive that there's no way to fight and then no way to flee, and we're trapped. And so the body has a way to respond to that, to protect us from the impending wounds by beginning inflammation and calming our heart rate. And so if we do get a wound, that we're not going to bleed as much. But of course, most of us don't actually face two lions in the wild. For us, it could be stresses within the office, or we're beginning to feel like we're helpless, that we're trapped, like the situation is hopeless and we are immobilized. So we're going to label this ladder immobilized. I say we, but the authors of this model appear in the lower right hand screen. This is Dr. Stephen Porges and Deb Dana. So we can stack these three ladders on top of one another to imagine the three parts of our autonomic nervous system. And during the day, this system helps our body to respond to perceptions of both safety and danger. So it's normal to go up and down this continuum throughout the day, hopefully coming back towards the top to that sense of safety and connection. Before we go into each of these more deeply, I'd like to pause to say that these are kind of like the three primary colors that we were taught about in elementary school. So we learned in elementary school that if you combine like red and blue, then you're going to get purple. Or if you combine like red and yellow, you can make orange paint. So it's the same with the polyvagal ladder. There's times where you can be both in the green part and the yellow part. Here's an example. So the yellow part, that's also a continuum. So let's say that you are playing basketball with friends. You're going to be mobilized right here, but that sense of stress doesn't need to be a bad thing, because you're also feeling like you're connected with your friends. The same thing for down on the blue section, that's also a continuum. So at the top of the ladder, that can also be green. For example, when I'm putting my daughters to bed, I oftentimes will snuggle with them, and I may have an arm that's draped over them. So they are immobilized, but they also are feeling safe and connected. So these colors can mix. So let's first talk more about the safe and connected. So the body, like we said, does pretty amazing things when we feel like we're safe. Our heart rate goes down, so it's more at a moderate to slower pace. And the oxygen in our bodies don't need to go to the large muscle groups to flee from a lion, so that oxygen can go up to the higher brain regions. And so we're more apt to use our complex problem solving. And like the screen says, we're more able to be social, to collaborate, to be curious about your perspectives, and to feel compassion for ourselves and for others. I think it's also interesting that one of the things that can happen when we're in this state is the eardrum changes shape just a tiny bit to help us to hear the middle frequencies of the human voice. And so we're lower down on the ladder. Our our stress response system can change the shape. The eardrums were more able to hear the lower frequencies that can be the sound of danger. So in our lives, that could be the sound of a heater or a fan that's in the building, or really high frequency sounds. So when we are in this space, our brains are more apt to be able to see the kindness of others. And that makes a positive feedback loop. That when we can see the kindness in other spaces, then we can also feel like we're more connected and safe. So when the body's in this phase, there's not as much inflammation. The heart rate's lower. So this is really good for long-term health. So when we move into, I can advance the slide without going too far. Oops, I went way too far. Here we go. So moving down the ladder. So when we feel mobilized, again, that's not always a bad thing. So stress hormones can be good, and they are good. So stress hormones help me to get out of bed in the morning, to help my household get out of bed in the morning. They're very useful for athletes, to help us to focus on really short-term deadlines, like getting a report done. But this is a continuum. So the more we move down the ladder towards the fight or flight, we may feel unease, agitated, driven to compete, be more likely to be critical of others, because we're seeing that there's maybe this potential for danger. So we're going to put, we're going to try to decide who's more powerful. And then if we keep going down, then we're going to be going into fight or flight. And just like we were talking about safety, if we feel like our body's on guard, then our immune system may be preparing for a wound. And so we could have more inflammation. And science is very clear that if we spend too long in this phase, that could be damaging to our health. So a lot of the same impacts on the body for this portion of the ladder, but it's helpful to clarify that we may not be going into this state because we feel like we're trapped, but that we feel that the students that we work with, that they're helped. I mean, they're helpless. And so moving down this part of the ladder, we can begin to feel reduced hope, loss of energy, critical of the self, and can deepen into isolation and depression. So this is not necessarily the logical brain. But the body's response to an ongoing sense of stress. And so once again, this is normal to go up and down the ladder. For instance, you might wake up in the morning and feel overwhelmed by the lack of resources to help the students that you work with. But then you go into the office and you see a person that reaches out and smiles and asks you how you're doing. And that sense of connection, that you're not alone, can help you to override the ups and downs of the morning. Maybe at lunchtime, you check your box and you find a thank you card. From a young person that you worked with 5 or 10 years ago. Maybe at 2 o'clock, you learn from a colleague that seems to revel in other people's defeats that a program that you started is might its funding pulled. You're discouraged, so you're not able to ride out the ups and downs. And then you go down. But at the end of the day, like your principal or supervisor pops in your office to tell you that they were able to save the funding, that they cherish you, and that they care about your well-being. So they ask you to turn off the lights and to head home to take care of yourself. So that's just one example of a day on the polyvagal ladder. So Christina came up with this point of this term, sticky ladders, and I love it. So what happens if you've had a lot of hardship and you are surviving the stress, but you find that you are, during the day, as the weeks go by, you tend to be mobilized or just on guard, or you tend to feel kind of trapped, like on a very mild level, or so we can get the next slide. It's going to pop forward all of a sudden. A combination of both. So, like we said earlier, it's normal, it's healthy to be like all over the ladder, but normally when the perception of safety is gone, our bodies are meant to come back to this sense of safety. So if you, what was my next point? Sorry. So this can happen again to all of us. And it can feel like there's a lion that's not attacking you, but is circling the house. It's this very mild sense of being either mobilized or immobilized. We might not even be consciously aware of it. So if you find yourself with a sticky ladder, just know that, or consider that this is a sign that you've been surviving hardship and that you're autonomic nervous system may have become overwhelmed. And this can happen to anybody. And so if it's happened to you, we encourage you to reach out to somebody for support, because just like you are working with students to help them heal, you deserve time to heal as well. So Christina, can you lead us through how to use this information?
Yeah, and Carolyn, would you mind just going ahead and keeping your screen share up for us?
Sure.
Thank you. And that's just it's so helpful. You know, we got a couple comments in the chat box to think about the analogy of the ladder, and the fluidness of the ladder, right? That we're up and down and kind of stopping and starting at different spaces in the ladder. And then sometimes we get a sticky ladder. I have a very visual image of sticky ladder, which I don't want to be on. But we're there sometimes. And so we wanted to just connect this information about the physiology of our autonomic nervous system and what's happening on our polyvagal ladder with what we can do about it. Because we know, again, it's not a if this is happening to you, it's a when it's happening to you. And so really having some of this new awareness or new terminology or new analogies for thinking about what's going on is a tool in and of itself, but we wanted to make it really concrete. And so we wanted to think about, and Carolyn, if we could advance the slide, we wanted to just have you all kind of take a moment to think about, when do you experience these things on the ladder? And so I think we're a small enough group. If folks want to unmute and share, you can. And Carolyn and I are certainly available to share what are situations where we're feeling connected, mobilized, and immobilized. And what we're going to do is kind of talk through that and help us recognize when we might be in these different spaces in the ladder. And so, Carolyn, I'm going to go ahead and jump in, and maybe actually the example I want to share is for the mobilized portion of the ladder. Do you want to share something for the connected portion of the ladder?
Sure. I feel, I think when I walk with one of my closest friends once a week, and I have to be honest, when I'm by myself, before my household wakes up in the morning, and I'm reading on the couch, like a science-y book, for some reason, I just feel safe and connected.
I love those examples, Carolyn. Anybody else want to share an example of an experience or a context in which they feel safe and connected?
I tend to feel really safe and connected when I'm with my family playing cards or just different games. My daughter is still young enough where she loves to snuggle. So she wants to do that as soon as I get home and in the morning and every night. So just, I think for my daughter, it's a lot of just that close contact, which I also love because I know her snuggling isn't going to last forever. Yeah. But also, with those phone calls to my friends back home in Arizona, because we just moved here. And so just maintaining those close connections the best I can with the time change and everything.
Thanks for sharing that, Laura. And Sandra, did I see that you wanted to share also?
Yeah, hi, this is Sandy. I'm just going to connect with what Carolyn said, because I feel very safe and connected in the morning when I'm having my coffee, sitting on a really nice, it's quiet in my house, and I can look outside at the lights and the neighboring houses, and I just feel, I love that feeling. So that's it.
Thank you, Sandy. And Sharon also shared in the chat about snuggling as well. She's a fan. She also has a very cute dog and an adorable husband to snuggle with, so that probably helps a lot too. And Vanessa's sharing about having good conversations with family. So yeah, it's really just important to think about, where can we put ourselves contextually where we recognize this feeling of safety and connection and tapping into our compassion and our creativity. And that can be really restorative, and we'll look back to that in a minute. But as Carolyn mentioned, we all have these experiences across the ladder. So we'll share a little bit about the mobilized zone. And I'm going to open it up if folks want to share about, some brief examples of where you feel mobilized or immobilized. I recently was invited by a group of my girlfriends to participate in an outrigger canoe competition. And none of us had ever been in an outrigger canoe. And so the idea was like, this would be a fun experience, and that, even though it's a race, we don't have to be competitive. And this was on a text thread. And I said, oh no, we are going to be competitive. Because as soon as you tell me there's an opportunity to compete, then it just like flips the switch for me. And I'm like ready to go and give it my all and do my best. And even if I'm just competing against myself, I feel like it's like an on-off switch for me. So I'm not competitive in all the things that I do. And if the off switch is off, like, it's fine, no problem. Like, I'm not feeling angsty about it. But if the switch gets flipped, like, that is it. There's just, I can't even go to trivia night. I mean, not that we have trivia nights anymore because of COVID, but back in the day when we had trivia nights, I couldn't go because I would get so agitated if we weren't winning. So that's my, sometimes it works for me, sometimes it works against me, mobilized example. Does anybody else want to share examples of contexts where they feel mobilized or immobilized?
I feel mobilized when I'm doing a training on a topic that I love like this, and I'm watching the clock, worrying that I'm going to go into Christina's time. That's one of my. And then one of my just quirky ones is I feel mobilized by a refrigerator compressors, and so my family kindly lets us keep our refrigerator in the garage, like not even the laundry room. I want it out of the house because it just mobilizes me. I don't know why. Anybody else?
Can you move us forward while other folks are sharing? Thank you. So these are just some general examples that we wanted to share, about experiences that can land differently with folks. So when we're feeling mobilized, thinking about if we're running late for something, thinking about being accused of something, whether we're responsible for it or not, all of these can kind of turn on that mobilized physiology. And then in our immobilized state, it could be, again, kind of this sense of overwhelm. The evening news is really great at inducing that experience. Or just feeling like we're powerless to achieve, what's on our to-do list. Having kind of chronic exposure to pain or illness. Again, all of these things can leave us really feeling burnt out, feeling immobilized, as if, there's nothing we can do about it, so why do anything at all? And so again, we're looking for fluidity in our ladder. So Carolyn, if you could go ahead and move us forward. What we wanted to share with you was this tool that you can use as a map to help you stay or move on the ladder. So again, at the top of the ladder in the green space, this is a kind of our own wellness plan that we can use to navigate our polyvagal ladder. And we'll go through some examples here, but you can see is, in some situations, you need to do it independently. In other situations, you can leverage colleagues, family, friends, strangers even, to help you stay in that space of feeling connected and feeling safe. And then in situations where we're in our mobilized or immobilized portion of the ladder, whether it's feeling sticky or we just kind of got there on a inadvertent path, thinking about how can we recognize it, first of all, so that awareness piece, and then think back to this plan, to this tool for how can I help myself stay fluid and move back into the green zone, into the connected space sooner rather than later. And so Carolyn, if we could go through that first example together. And so in this case, you know, we're looking at the research, looking at the evidence, looking at what we know culturally can really help us navigate staying in this space of connectedness. And so we have some examples of things that you can do independently here on the left. And we saw some of these examples in our chat box earlier, especially connected to nature, connected to movement, can be really powerful ways to help us stay anchored in this space. And then, you know, thinking about all of the physiology that tells us the benefits of connecting to other people, right? So when there are others that can be available to you, and whether that's over the phone or in real life or in some FaceTime or virtual forum, even letter writing. So just all of these strategies that help us connect and invest in supportive relationships, in reciprocity with others, triggering our mirror neurons so that, as Carolyn mentioned, us smiling at someone and someone smiling back at us, as simple as that, the research shows us really creates a shift in our physiology and in our experience of feeling safe, connected, compassionate, creative, and restored and replenished as well. I'm going to move us forward because I feel like getting us out of those other spaces in our ladder is where we can really invest in this wellness plan piece. And so again, I want to just acknowledge, you know, when you're reading some of these examples about how to move out of the mobilized state on your own, or when you have other folks to access, probably none of them are going to blow your mind. And so what I want to do is just flag for you here, this isn't the big reveal, like this is the secret to the rest of your life on the polyvagal ladder. A lot of these are common sense. A lot of these might be strategies that you know already. But what Carolyn and I are coming to you with is this tool and this encouragement that you create your own map. And we'll be sharing this as a handout so that you can use it with on your own, with your family, with your colleagues. But this idea that having your own wellness map and going through the practice of actually jotting some of it down, and that's what I'm going to ask you all to do in just a moment, jot some of these down, really helps you connect back to it when you're experiencing a moment of escalation. And I'll give you a quick example. Different than my competitiveness trigger. Last week, I was in a situation where I really honestly could not believe that all of these things were happening at once. But I was like at the end of a 10-hour power outage. My cat got out of the house and I was running back and forth in and out of the porch door, trying to get the cat to come back into the house, but it's pitch black and all I have is a candle. And so I thought I heard the cat and I grabbed the candle and started running out the porch door and spill hot wax all over my hand and the floor and the new rug that I just bought. And just then the lights come back on. And now I've been in and out of the porch door like 7 times in the pitch black with my candle. And as the lights come back on, I see the biggest tarantula on the corner of the screen door. So I was very mobilized. It was like a lot of really scary things all happening with like urgency and surprise. And I actually had a moment where I said, I need to stop. I need to take some deep breaths. I am just going to like spiral at this point if I don't intervene with my polyvagal response. The spider was really the tipping point, I have to say. And so I just stopped. I just let the cat stay outside. I put the candle down. I left the spider situation temporarily until I could gather myself, do some deep breathing exercises, make some rational choices about how I was going to handle the next steps in my life. And it was just because I had this tool already mapped in mind. And so I could pull from it, not only from my awareness, but also by knowing what were going to be the things that could help change my stress response. And so I want to pause here. We do have a couple minutes, and I want to stay in this particular area and see in the mobilized zone and see if folks will share some commitments that they can make to adding to their own wellness plan for how you would move out of this space on your own and how you would move out of this space if you have access to others. So if folks want to unmute and share or want to put it in the chat, again, really kind of going through the practice of using this tool is what's going to make the difference in terms of shifting your own experiences of stress response. Anyone have any go-tos that they want to throw out there for how to de-escalate oneself when escalated?
So two of the tools we use just in our household is we use playlists a lot. So there's times when if we're feeling immobilized, we'll use a calming one, maybe like calm coffee shop, or there's like an autumn coffee shop that's soft. We also keep a deck of cards on our kitchen table. We have teenagers, and so when they're feeling overwhelmed, we oftentimes will play a card game that's very like interactive and about connecting.
So that feels like a reset almost, right, Carolyn?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thank you. And I see an example that someone shared in the chat is thinking about happy thoughts and saying them out loud. I like the extra step there, Winter, because sometimes it is just taking it a little bit further beyond just the cognition and conceptualization to verbalizing or doing that makes the difference in terms of making the shift. And Laura's sharing some examples of how she can really pull from the visual cues around her in artwork, photos, and I love the back massager idea, Laura, great one. I'm gonna add that to my list. And Sandy's sharing about affirmations on her wall that she reads that help kind of move her out of this space and back into the connected and safe space. So again, Carolyn, if we could move forward one. So again, this tool is designed to work in all three sections. I didn't want to spend too much time talking about the immobilized piece, but again, honoring what space you're in, learning to recognize it, and then mapping out what you think will help you stay fluid or will help kind of rinse off that stickiness as you're moving along the ladder, right? So remembering that we don't want to stay in any of these spaces too long because of the impact it has on our mental health and on our physical health. And so thinking again about when things are potentially more extreme or chronically elevated, what are the strategies that we can use on our own? And then what are the strategies that we can use with others? And so as I mentioned, Carolyn and I are going to be sharing this as a handout that you'll have access to, but if you haven't already, if you want to take a minute before we transition to just on a Post-it note or in a text or message to yourself, identify what are the things that you can do when you recognize that you might be in an immobilized or mobilized state and would benefit. It would be helpful to move into the connected space sooner rather than later. Carolyn, I'm going to ask you to just jump one slide forward. And again, Carolyn and I want to just center this on you and the work that you're doing. And again, with gratitude and deep appreciation for the showing up that you are doing for young people, that you're doing for colleagues, that you're doing for friends and family, and making sure that it's a priority for you to invest in your own well-being, right? So that we can show up not only for ourselves, but also show up for others, right? Because we know that to be able to take care of others, you're going to need to be cared for. You're going to need to be well yourself. And that's part of that culture of care that we're trying to promote across schools, across communities, that it really is something that investing in ourselves and practicing with others can really model, again, these strategies we know are effective in helping regulate stress. So I'm gonna, we'll do maybe just a couple minutes of Q&A, but as folks are teeing up any questions or comments they might have, I wanted to just briefly land on some of the references, or not some of them, all of the references that we have available for the materials. So there's amazing additional resources about this polyvagal ladder concept And so if that's information that you want to share, we have some recommendations here. And then we do have all of our research references available in this deck for you. So if you are interested in those, they are going to be available when it gets posted to the website. And Carolyn, if you could go ahead and stop share, I'm going to invite folks to ask any questions that they might have before we wrap up. I think that means you nailed it, Carolyn.
I just have a question about how to access the slide deck.
Sure, Sharon, can I let you answer that one?
Yes, once Christina or Carolyn send it to me, it will be posted on the same link on the website. So you go to the same register link and there's a folder, a Google folder that has all the presentations in there.
Thanks. Well, I want to give appreciations to all of you. Sharon, any news about next sessions for these folks?
Yes, I was just pulling that up. Thursday, we have a chronic disease management session on asthma. Next Tuesday, listening to scientists and our grandmothers, self-compassion and rational optimism with Carolyn and Christina. And then Tuesday, November 30th, the next series in our Transforming Schools series, Transforming Schools Place-Based Style. So that's what we have coming up until the end of the month.
Awesome. And Sharon, do you have that link handy to the Google folder?
Yes, I am getting that right now.
Thanks. Well, we look forward to seeing all of you at some of those upcoming sessions. And again, Sharon will post the materials into the Google folder, probably give us 24 hours or so. Sharon, bless you, the PowerPoint is available. The handout will be available shortly. And yes, and in the meantime, please be well, take good care of yourselves and then each other. So again, we know that there's a lot happening for everyone out there, and we want to make sure that you know that you're connected to a community of care through this network. So thank you for being here today.